The Middle Ages are often remembered for their chaos, armored clashes, and the sheer brutality of war. Steel rang against steel, and survival frequently depended on who struck first or hardest. But behind all the noise and bloodshed, there was also calculation, purpose, and restraint. Not every fight was a matter of life and death. In many cases, victory meant something more controlled, overpowering an opponent, asserting dominance, making a point, without delivering a fatal blow. Weapons reflected that mindset. Among the blades and arrows built for killing, there existed tools that told a different story. They didn't rely on sharp edges or deep cuts. Instead, they used force differently, through pressure, leverage, and precision. Their presence meant you didn't always have to kill to win. You just had to break someone's stance, their confidence, or their ability to fight back. This wasn't about mercy. It was about power expressed through discipline. In battles, in training halls, and in the streets, these weapons allowed fighters to impose control without spilling blood. They showed that dominance didn't always need a body count, and sometimes the strongest hand was the one that knew exactly when to hold back. Number 1, the flanged mace. At first glance, the flanged mace looks like something out of a nightmare, an unforgiving lump of metal designed to crush whatever it hits. But behind that brutal exterior was a surprisingly precise purpose. This wasn't a tool of mindless violence, it was a response to a changing battlefield, a weapon engineered with one specific goal: to overcome armor and subdue enemies without necessarily ending their lives. As full-body plate armor became increasingly common in the later Middle Ages, traditional swords started to lose their effectiveness. A sharp blade simply couldn't penetrate the hardened steel of a well-equipped knight. Slashing and stabbing were useless if the edge couldn't even reach the flesh beneath the metal. That's where the flanged mace entered the picture, offering a completely different kind of power. The secret was in its design. Rather than trying to slice or pierce, the flanged mace delivered concentrated, bone-crushing impact. Its head featured raised ridges called flanges that acted like pressure points, channeling the force of each swing into a narrow target zone. When swung with enough momentum, these flanges could dent armor, shatter bones, or cause internal damage without leaving a visible wound. A single strike to the helmet could give a knight a concussion through his steel visor. A blow to the ribs might collapse the chest plate and break bones underneath. Yet, despite this destructive potential, the flanged mace had a unique advantage over cutting weapons. It didn't have to kill. That made it invaluable in a time when capturing someone, especially a noble, was often more profitable than killing them outright. On the battlefield, this weapon allowed its wielder to disable quickly and efficiently. No need for fancy swordplay or precise thrusts, just brute force aimed in the right direction. Even a less skilled fighter could become dangerous with a flanged mace, which made it a common choice among foot soldiers and men-at-arms who needed a reliable weapon against armored foes. For knights, it became a powerful secondary weapon, something to fall back on when a sword was useless. In duels or close-quarters combat, where grappling and strikes blended together, the mace offered a devastating follow-up that could end the fight without ending the opponent's life. That level of control, of being able to win without killing, gave it a kind of strategic depth that many other weapons simply didn't offer. Number 2, the warhammer. The warhammer wasn't just a weapon, it was a cold, calculated response to a changing world where brute force alone no longer guaranteed victory. As medieval warfare evolved, so did the defenses. Plate armor, once a luxury for the elite, became more common on the battlefield, turning once deadly sword strikes into harmless clinks against steel. This shift in armor technology created a problem. Traditional weapons couldn't do their job anymore. Warriors needed something that didn't rely on cutting or stabbing, something that could neutralize an opponent wearing full armor. That's when the warhammer entered the scene, and it didn't come quietly. Compact, deadly, and brutally efficient, the warhammer wasn't designed to look impressive. It was built to get results. Typically featuring a short haft for close combat or a longer version for mounted use, the head of the weapon was divided into two functional parts. On one side, a blunt hammer face capable of delivering enormous impact. On the other, a hardened spike designed to puncture or hook. The genius of the warhammer lay in its dual-purpose nature. While the spike was more dangerous and capable of causing lethal injuries if aimed at weak spots in armor, it was the hammer face that truly changed the nature of combat. This flat or slightly rounded side could collapse breastplates, crack helmets, or break limbs without shedding a single drop of blood. What set the warhammer apart was its ability to deliver targeted strikes with devastating consequences. Skilled fighters used them not to kill but to control. A well-placed hit to a knee could cripple a warrior instantly. A strike to the shoulder could disarm him. A blow to the helmet might knock someone unconscious without splitting their skull. It wasn't about wild swinging, it was about choosing your moment and striking with purpose. And that made all the difference. In battles where capturing an enemy meant ransom, influence, or political leverage, the warhammer became a tactical tool as much as a weapon. Even on horseback, warhammers were used to unseat riders, to stun rather than slay. Knights knew they had more to gain from an enemy who could be held for ransom than from one lying dead in the mud. That practical mindset shaped how warhammers were used. Swift, decisive force aimed at disabling, not destroying. This wasn't a weapon of chaos, it was a weapon of control. Number 3, the quarterstaff. At first glance, the quarterstaff might seem like the most unassuming of all medieval weapons. A simple, lengthy rod of hardwood with no blade, no metal, no ornate decorations. But this long wooden pole, typically 6 to 9 feet in length, was far from primitive. In fact, the quarterstaff was one of the most intelligent solutions to the problem of self-defense, in a time when carrying a sword could get you arrested or mistaken for a soldier. It didn't shine like steel or carry the prestige of a knight's blade, but in the hands of someone who knew how to wield it, the quarterstaff became a devastatingly effective tool, one that could stop a fight without ending a life. The brilliance of the quarterstaff came down to its mechanics. Built from ash, oak, or hazel, dense woods that could take a beating without snapping, it used the laws of physics to its advantage. With its sheer length and leverage, the staff could generate enormous force without requiring excessive strength. A strike from a skilled fighter could knock the wind out of a man, break a forearm raised in defense, or send someone sprawling to the ground before they even knew what hit them. And yet, that same force could be pulled just short of lethal. It was an instrument of control, aggressive enough to disable but versatile enough to be held back. In close combat, especially in tight alleys, village streets, or indoor spaces like taverns or halls, the quarterstaff truly shined. While swords and axes needed room to swing, the staff could jab, thrust, and pivot with speed and precision. A fighter could land several strikes in the time it took an opponent to draw a blade. It was especially effective at targeting limbs, wrists, knees, shoulders, places that, when struck, took an opponent out of the fight without causing death. In a world where many confrontations weren't battlefield encounters, but brawls, robberies, or arrests that mattered, guards, bailiffs, and even traveling merchants favored the quarterstaff because it could deal with threats swiftly without turning the scene into a bloodbath. The staff also held a prominent place in martial training, particularly in non-lethal combat schools. It was used to teach timing, distance, and control, and because it lacked a killing edge, it allowed fighters to spar at full speed without constantly risking each other's lives. This wasn't just a peasant's weapon, it was the thinking warrior's tool, ideal for subduing, restraining, and dominating an opponent without spilling blood. In a society where survival often meant walking the fine line between power and restraint, the quarterstaff hit that balance perfectly. Number 4, the blunt tournament sword, federschwert. In the structured chaos of the late medieval period, not every weapon was forged to draw blood. Some were crafted for a different kind of battle, one fought with rules, spectators, and reputation on the line. The federschwert, or blunt tournament sword, stands as one of the clearest examples of a weapon specifically designed not to kill, but to test, train, and triumph without unnecessary bloodshed. At a glance, it resembles a longsword, It has a crossguard, a grip, and a blade that stretches out with familiar length and balance. But a closer look reveals its true nature. Its blade is deliberately blunted, often hollow ground or widened near the hilt, and built for flexibility. It wasn't intended to cut through flesh or armor. It was intended to challenge opponents in contests of skill and control. Used primarily in fencing schools and knightly tournaments, the federschwert played a central role in martial culture where honor mattered just as much as victory. Combatants didn't seek to kill or maim, but to dominate through technique. Matches weren't won with blood. They were won through calculated strikes, clean footwork, disarms, and grapples. Even in full armor, fighters wielded the federschwert with precision, relying on timing and accuracy rather than brute force. The lack of a sharpened edge forced combatants to develop finesse, and that in turn made the federschwert one of the most respected training tools of its time. The weapon also spoke volumes about the mindset of those who used it. Knights and nobles understood that their enemies weren't just bodies to be eliminated. They were often fellow aristocrats, potential allies, or rivals whose reputations could be broken without ending their lives. The federschwert allowed a fighter to publicly defeat another, to bruise both body and pride, and to walk away with both combatants alive. Changed perhaps, but not buried. This wasn't just about avoiding death. It was about delivering a message, preserving reputations, and showing mastery of an art that transcended killing. In this way, the federschwert became more than a weapon. It was a test of discipline, a tool of education, a symbol of a warrior class that, despite living in a violent age, knew the value of restraint. It offered victory without blood, power without slaughter, and respect earned not by killing, but by control. Number 5, the poleaxe, used with control. Among the arsenal of medieval polearms, the poleaxe stood out not just for its fearsome appearance, but for the remarkable versatility and control it offered to a skilled warrior. At first glance, it looked like something crafted purely for devastation, an intimidating fusion of axe blade, hammer face, and steel spike mounted atop a sturdy wooden haft. Each part of the weapon served a different function, creating a kind of battlefield multi-tool, capable of adapting to any situation. Yet, despite its lethal potential, the poleaxe was often wielded with precision and purpose. Not to slaughter indiscriminately, but to dominate opponents while offering the possibility of sparing their lives. Typically ranging between 5 and 6 feet in length, the poleaxe was designed with the realities of armored combat in mind. As full-plate armor became more widespread during the 14th and 15th centuries, warriors needed weapons that could exploit weak points, unbalance an opponent, or apply crushing force without relying on blades alone. The axe head was perfect for delivering cleaving blows or hooking around a target's leg or arm, destabilizing them. The hammer side could dent armor, crack helmets, and incapacitate with blunt trauma. The spike, often at the top, was reserved for thrusting attacks, deadly if aimed at joints or gaps in the armor, but also useful for intimidation and psychological pressure. But what made the poleaxe truly exceptional wasn't its raw force. It was the level of control it granted to experienced users. In knightly duels, judicial combats, and formal tournaments where killing was not the objective, the poleaxe became a tool of balance. Combatants would use the haft to strike, shove, or trip, relying on leverage and timing rather than brute strength. The flat of the axe or even the butt of the weapon could deliver punishing yet non-lethal blows that disoriented or forced the opponent into submission. Manuals from the period emphasized targeting limbs, attacking the balance of the enemy, and using the weapon's versatility to create openings without necessarily finishing the fight with a fatal strike. This approach to combat reflected a deeper understanding of warfare as more than just violence. Winning wasn't always about death. It was often about control, about demonstrating superiority or securing a living captive who could be ransomed or politically exploited. Knights who fought with poleaxes understood this. They trained not just to kill, but to manage the pace and tone of the fight. The weapon itself demanded strategy. Switching between sides in mid-combat, exploiting angles, manipulating the opponent's body, These were signs of a refined, martial mind. Even the psychological presence of the poleaxe was commanding. It told the opponent that their fate lay entirely in the hands of the wielder, who could, with one motion, choose mercy or destruction. And that dynamic, that constant awareness of choice in the midst of battle, made the poleaxe more than just a tool of war. It became a symbol of disciplined power where violence was not wild or uncontrolled, but measured, intentional, and, when necessary, restrained. Number 6. The club or baton. Law enforcement use. Among all the weapons developed during the medieval period, few were as understated yet widely relied upon as the club, also referred to as a baton in more formal contexts. It lacked the grandeur of a sword, the elegance of a polearm, or the intimidating presence of a mace. Yet its role in daily life, especially in maintaining public order, was undeniably critical. While many medieval weapons were forged for battlefields, the club was crafted for the streets, alleys, marketplaces, and castle corridors. Places where violence could erupt quickly, but where killing wasn't the goal. Made from dense hardwoods like oak or ash, often reinforced with iron rings or metal bands to add weight and durability, the club was designed to deliver fast, forceful blows. Its construction was intentionally simple. No blades to sharpen, no spikes to maintain. It was easy to carry, quick to draw, and incredibly versatile. In a time when local guards, gatekeepers, and watchmen needed to react swiftly to theft, drunken brawls, or public disturbances, the club was the ideal tool. It allowed them to impose authority without escalating a situation into something fatal. In medieval towns and fortified castles, violence had to be controlled. Guards couldn't simply cut down citizens for disorderly conduct or petty crimes, especially in crowded environments where bystanders were close. Bloodshed in the streets could trigger panic, riots, or even accusations of abuse from those in power. The club was the answer to this dilemma. One well-placed strike could stop a fleeing thief, knock an unruly drunk to the ground, or disperse a fight before it turned deadly. It didn't require advanced combat training, just timing, awareness, and confidence. This made it practical for local enforcers who often had limited resources and little formal military background. But the use of the club extended beyond just law enforcement. Within military camps, it also served as an instrument of discipline. Officers used batons, often ornately carved or symbolically decorated, to assert their rank. A strike from such a baton could be both literal and symbolic, a warning to a disobedient soldier, a correction for misconduct, or a signal of shame. It wasn't about injury, it was about dominance and setting a standard. Similarly, in public punishments, the club might be used to beat a criminal before an audience, delivering both physical pain and public humiliation without necessarily causing lasting harm. That was an important distinction in a culture where punishment often walked a fine line between justice and cruelty. What made the club especially effective was its balance between restraint and authority. It reminded people that force didn't always need to be fatal to be powerful. A guard armed with a club carried enough influence to restore order without drawing blood. In a world where chaos could spark from the smallest street dispute, such a tool offered control with minimal consequence. Simple in form, profound in function, the medieval club was less about warfare and more about peace, enforced through blunt, decisive action.